The air in the studio tasted like turpentine and regret. I wiped a smear of ochre from my cheek with the back of my hand, leaving a faint yellow streak. Another canvas, another dead end. For weeks, I'd been staring at a blank expanse of linen, the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. My agent, a man whose suits cost more than my rent, was starting to get that tight-lipped look. The one that said, "Dean, where are the masterpieces? Where's the next shock to the system?" I didn't have any answers, not anymore. The well had run dry, or maybe it had simply been poisoned long ago. I traced the rim of my empty coffee mug, the ceramic cool against my fingertips. The silence in my apartment, usually a welcome balm, felt brittle tonight, ready to shatter. Every creak of the building, every distant siren amplified in the stillness, snagging at my nerves. I was a tightly wound spring, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that something was about to break. Then the call came. It was a lawyer, his voice a dry rustle of paper. He spoke of probate, of distant relatives, of a will I hadn't known existed. My estranged grandmother, a woman I'd barely seen in my adult life, had passed, and she'd left me. Everything, Blackwood Manor. The name itself conjured images of shadows and dust, of a past I'd meticulously buried. My stomach clenched. Blackwood. It was the place I'd tried to scrub from my memory, the place where she resided. The lawyer assured me all the paperwork was in order. I could visit the property at my convenience, sign the final documents. He provided an address, a postcode I vaguely recognized from childhood road trips, a place I'd always begged my parents to drive past faster. A week later, I was standing on the cracked cobblestone drive of Blackwood Manor. The house loomed before me, a skeletal silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. It was even worse than I'd imagined. This was no inheritance, it was a sentence. The lawyer had given me a heavy, ornate key. It turned in the lock with a groan that echoed through the cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of decay and something else. Something vaguely floral, like wilted potpourri. My footsteps, hesitant at first, then firmer, sounded unnaturally loud on the warped floorboards. I moved through the downstairs rooms, each one a monument to neglect. Cobwebs draped the furniture like macabre shrouds. A grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at 3:15. In the parlor, a piano sat lidless, its keys yellowed and chipped like a row of decaying teeth. It was the stillness that unnerved me most. A heavy, expectant quiet, as if the house itself was waiting. It was identical to one I remembered from my grandmother's attic, the one where... No, I shook my head, trying to dislodge the intrusive thought. I was an artist, a man of logic and reason. Childhood fears were just that, fears. They had no power here, not anymore. I found my way to the back of the house, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The kitchen was a relic, its cast-iron stove a hulking beast. Beyond it, a narrow corridor led to a service staircase. The floorboards on the landing above were slick with a fine layer of grime. And then I saw it. Propped against the wall, half hidden in the gloom, was a small porcelain doll. Its painted eyes, a startling shade of blue, seemed to gleam in the dim light. Its dress, once a vibrant red, was now faded and stained. It was Leela, the doll from my nightmares, the doll I thought had been destroyed. My breath hitched. My hands, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble. It was impossible. I had seen her broken, discarded. How could she be here? The air around me grew heavy, suffocating. The floral scent intensified, sickly sweet. I wanted to run to flee this suffocating house, but my feet were rooted to the spot. A low, almost imperceptible hum began to fill the air, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. What was this place? And why had she been brought back to it? The air inside the mess hall after lights out. Chairs still warm, tasted like stale sweat and desperation. I'd found my way here by pure instinct, a wrong turn in the labyrinthine corridors of Blackwood Manor. The scent, thick and cloying, clung to the peeling paint and the scarred tabletops. It was a smell I recognized, a phantom echo from a time I'd tried to bury so deep I'd forgotten its shape. My stomach churned, a tight knot of unease. This place. It felt wrong, a hollowed-out shell brimming with unseen things. My footsteps, tentative at first, grew bolder as I moved deeper into the room. The faint light filtering through grimy windows cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. Dust motes, caught in these weak beams, swirled like tiny, agitated spirits. I ran a hand along the back of a wooden chair, the surface still radiating a residual warmth. Who had sat here? My eyes swept across the rows of tables, each one bearing the marks of countless meals. Countless lives lived and lost within these walls. But the feeling persisted, a prickling on my skin, the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. I was an artist, a man who dealt in perception, but this was beyond mere visual trickery. This was a feeling, a palpable weight pressing down on me. I moved towards the far end of the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, drawn by a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. It was nothing, of course. I exhaled slowly, trying to loosen the tension in my jaw. Dean, I reminded myself, I ran here to sort through my grandmother's belongings, not to succumb to the morbid fantasies of a child. This house was old, decaying, and prone to playing tricks on the senses. That was all, yet the feeling persisted. In the alcove, a small wooden trunk sat half-hidden beneath a tattered canvas sheet. It was old, its metal clasps tarnished, the wood warped with age. A faint, sweet scent, like decaying potpourri, emanated from it. My fingers, trembling slightly, reached for the latch. It was stiff, resistant, as if guarding its contents. With a sharp tug, it sprang open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous room. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed linens and brittle lace, was a collection of small porcelain dolls. They were antique, their painted smiles frozen in time, their glass eyes staring blankly ahead. I recognized them instantly. My grandmother had collected them, a morbid hobby that had always unsettled me. But one doll, smaller than the rest, drew my attention. It was dressed in a faded blue dress, its yarn hair a tangled mess. Its eyes, unlike the others, seemed to hold a spark of something knowing. Leela, it couldn't be. I'd left her behind, a relic of a childhood nightmare, yet here he was, her painted smile now seeming less innocent, more like a sneer. Her tiny, porcelain hands were curled into fists as if poised to strike. The air around the doll felt charged. A faint, almost inaudible humming seemed to emanate from her, a sound that vibrated in my bones. I recoiled, knocking against the trunk. A few of the other dolls tumbled out, their porcelain limbs clattering against the floor. The sound was sharp, jarring. I scrambled to pick them up, my hands clumsy and uncooperative. But as I reached for Leela, my fingers brushed against her dress. It felt strangely soft, almost alive, and then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement, the faintest twitch of her head as if she were turning to look at me. My breath hitched. My vision swam. I was seeing things, I told myself. But the humming intensified, growing from a whisper to a low thrum that filled my ears, drowning out the creaks of the house. It was a sound that burrowed deep, a discordant melody that spoke of things best left undisturbed. I snatched my hand back, my skin tingling with a phantom touch. The doll remained, its gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, its painted smile unwavering, but I knew, deep down I knew, he was here, and he was not alone. The memories, buried for so long, began to surface, sharp and jagged like shards of glass. It was all coming back. The mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, no longer felt like just a room. It felt like a cage, and I was trapped inside with something ancient and hungry. What had my grandmother kept her here for, and why had she left her for me? It was the smell of abandonment, of lives lived and then abruptly ended, a perfume of forgotten things. My own breath hitched, a small, ragged sound in the oppressive quiet. This place, this house, it was a tomb, and I was its reluctant inheritor. I pushed a chair back. Scrape of wood on linoleum, a jarring intrusion. My eyes scanned the rows of empty tables, the shadowy corners where the feeble moonlight struggled to penetrate. I was looking for what? I didn't know. A sign, a clue, anything to explain the gnawing unease that had settled in my gut the moment I'd stepped across the threshold of this mausoleum. My grandmother, a woman I barely knew, had left it all to me. My fingers traced the grain of a scarred tabletop, the gouges deep, like claw marks. A tremor ran through my hand, not entirely my own. I pulled my hand away, rubbing my palm against my jeans. This house was not just old, it felt watched. I'd spent the last few days sorting through the detritus of a life I'd never understood. Rooms crammed with furniture shrouded in dust sheets, boxes overflowing with brittle photographs and yellowed letters. The air in each space was thick with the scent of decay, of forgotten perfume and dried flowers. My grandmother had been a hoarder of memories, it seemed, and now I was tasked with sifting through them. It was different from the other storage, more deliberate. A strange compulsion drew me towards it, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. My footsteps were silent on the grimy floor. The clasp was stiff, resisting my initial attempts. I fumbled with it, my breath coming faster now, a tight knot forming in my chest. Finally, with a reluctant click, it sprang open. The contents were a jumble of fabrics, silks, and velvets that felt impossibly soft, yet held a faint, musty odor. I pushed them aside, my heart beginning to thud a heavy, insistent rhythm against my ribs. Beneath the layers of cloth, something hard and smooth met my touch, and then I saw her. Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face impossibly smooth, her painted eyes wide and unblinking. Her dress, a faded blue lace, was immaculate, not a speck of dust marring its delicate fabric. She sat propped against a stack of embroidered linens, her tiny hands folded demurely in her lap. She looked patient, waiting. A wave of nausea washed over me. My vision swam, the edges of the room blurring. The air grew thick, suffocating. It wasn't just the smell of dust and decay anymore. It was something else, something acrid and metallic, like old pennies, and something far, far worse. My hands trembled violently as I reached out, then snatched them back. Her gaze, fixed and vacant, seemed to pierce through me. The doll hadn't changed, but I had. I was supposed to be safe now, grown, rational. The doll's painted smile seemed to widen a cruel, knowing curve. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose floorboard. I nearly fell, catching myself on the edge of the trunk. My breath came in ragged gasps. This was impossible. He was just a doll, a toy. My grandmother had kept her. Why? The painted eyes of the doll seemed to follow me, a silent, knowing accusation. The memories, sharp and unwelcome, clawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to spill over. But beneath the panic, a new feeling stirred, a nascent anger. This house, this doll, they were anchors to a past I desperately wanted to sever. My grandmother had kept Leela. She knew. He had to have known. What else had she kept hidden away in this decaying monument to her secrets? It was the smell of forgotten meals, of arguments left to fester, of a hunger that had nothing to do with food. My own stomach churned, a hollow ache that felt too familiar. I'd been looking for a quiet corner, a place to sketch without the oppressive weight of the master bedroom bearing down on me. A faint scraping sound, metal on linoleum. My head snapped up. Nothing. Just the vast, empty space, punctuated by the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the distance. It was probably just the old pipes, the house settling, groaning under its own considerable age. I told myself that. I had to. But the sound had been too deliberate, too playful, like a child dragging a toy across the floor. My hand instinctively went to the charcoal stick in my pocket, a familiar weight, a small anchor. I moved deeper into the hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the cracked tiles. I didn't want to know. I traced the edge of one table with my fingertip. It was cool, slick with a film of grease and something else I couldn't quite identify. A shiver traced its way up my spine, independent of the room's temperature, which was unnervingly neutral. Stagnant. Then I heard it again. A soft, rhythmic thudding, not scraping this time. Thud. It was coming from the far end of the hall near the service entrance. My breath hitched. The emergency lights were too sparse, too weak. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The thudding continued, steady, unnerving. It sounded like something being dropped, repeatedly, gently. I imagined a small, weighted object falling from a low height, bouncing once, twice, then falling again. Leela's eye, I stopped. The sound stopped with me. I was an artist, but this felt beyond my control. It felt like the house itself was playing with me, a cruel, unseen puppeteer. A faint giggle, high-pitched, airy, and impossibly close. It seemed to emanate from the very air around me, swirling, then dissipating like smoke. My eyes darted wildly, searching for the source. There was no one there. The giggle echoed in my mind, a phantom sound that clawed at my sanity. It was the sound of Leela. It had to be. I backed away slowly, my gaze fixed on the far end of the hall. I wanted to run, to flee back into the labyrinthine corridors, back to the relative safety of my unfinished canvases. But my feet felt rooted heavy, as if the floor itself were trying to hold me captive. Then a flicker in my peripheral vision, a flash of movement at the edge of the light near the service door, small, quick. I blinked, my vision blurring for a second. When it cleared, there was nothing. But the impression remained vivid and unsettling. I could feel the tremor in my hands, a violent shaking that I couldn't control. I needed to get out. Now. I turned, my movements clumsy, desperate. I stumbled over an overturned chair, catching myself on a table just before I fell. The metal scraped against my palm, a sharp, stinging sensation that brought a jolt of pain, grounding me for a split second. As I regained my balance, my eyes fell on the table I was gripping. Scratched into the surface, deep and deliberate, were letters. Crude, uneven, as if etched with a fingernail. It felt like ice water being poured directly into my veins. This wasn't just in my head. This was real. It was all connected, and it was all here in this decaying mansion with me. I scrambled to my feet, the stinging in my palm forgotten. I didn't look back. I ran. My footsteps pounded on the linoleum, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the phantom sounds. I burst through the swinging doors, gasping for air that felt cleaner, less suffocating, even if it was just the stale air of the corridor. I leaned against the cool plaster wall, my body trembling uncontrollably. I could still feel the phantom giggle, hear the rhythmic thudding. And I could see the name etched into the table, burning itself into my memory. Leela, he was here, and he was letting me know, but why now? Why here? What did she want? The chill in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm from the evening meal, always clung to the air. It was an earthy smell like old wood and forgotten rain. I'd always hated it even before. Now it felt like a shroud. The scratching had stopped, the giggling had faded, but the silence that followed was worse. It hummed with a latent energy, a coiled spring waiting to snap. I stood there, my breath misting in the dim emergency lighting, the sting of whatever had happened earlier still a phantom ache on my skin. I needed to work. The urge was a physical thing, a gnawing in my gut. My studio, a cavernous space on the third floor, had become my sanctuary, my prison. The canvases were stacked high, waiting. The paints, a riot of color, mocked me with their potential. I'd been trying to paint the landscape outside the west wing window, the skeletal trees clawing at the bruised twilight sky, but my hands wouldn't obey. They itched, a deep, unsettling tremor running through my fingers. Back in the studio, the air was thick with turpentine and linseed oil. I grabbed a fresh canvas, the rough weave of the fabric a familiar texture under my clammy palms. My hands moved with a life of their own. The brushstrokes were frantic, aggressive. I wasn't painting what I saw, I was painting what I felt. It was a face, I realized with a lurch of my stomach, but it wasn't my face. It was hers, Leela's. The mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, felt like a memory trying to reassert itself. My grandmother, the housekeeper, the groundskeeper, they'd all dismissed my fears. Just my imagination, Dean, they'd say, their voices laced with a weariness that hinted at something more. Now my imagination was a weapon, or rather it was being wielded. The doll, Leela, wasn't just a plaything. He was an anchor, a conduit. And my art, my passion, my very soul was becoming the ink with which she wrote her story. Another canvas. This time I didn't even pick up a brush. I smeared paint directly onto the canvas with my bare hands, the thick, viscous texture of visceral shock. It was the hallway outside my childhood bedroom. A silhouette. It was too small to be an adult, too hunched to be a child. It was just there, watching. My breathing grew shallow. The studio, once a place of solace, now felt claustrophobic. The scent of paint was overpowering, almost suffocating. I could feel the eyes on me, not just from the canvas, but from the corners of the room, from the deep recesses of my own mind. The scratching. It was back, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. Not on the door, not on the walls, inside my head. I stumbled back, my hands coated in a thick, cloying crimson. It wasn't paint, not entirely. A thin trickle, warm and viscous, ran from my palm where a sharp edge of the palette knife had grazed me. But the color, it was too deep, too rich. It looked like blood. The doll. Leela, he was in the house. I knew it. He was feeding on the fear, on the memories I'd buried so deep. And now he was using my art to drag them back into the light, twisted and grotesque. I looked at the paintings. The child's terrified face, the dark hallway. They were me and they were not me. They were the echo of a trauma, amplified and distorted by something ancient and malevolent. My hands trembled. I wanted to destroy them, to burn them all. Who was Leela before she became this thing? What had happened in this house, in this family, to create such a deep, festering wound? And how much longer could I resist her pull before I became just another brushstroke in her horrifying masterpiece? The scratching in my head intensified, a desperate, claws-on chalkboard screech. Was I painting Leela's story, or was she painting mine? The silence after the scratching was worse. It pressed in, heavy and suffocating, like the humid air before a storm. I lay in my cot, the thin mattress doing little to soften the hard springs digging into my back. My eyes were wide open, scanning the oppressive darkness of the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. Each sound, a distant groan of settling timbers, a rustle from the pantry, amplified into something sinister in the stillness. I'd always hated this place, even as a child. It was a place of forced congregation, of shared meals that tasted of dust and desperation, of nights spent listening to the unsettling symphony of the house breathing. The memory of Leela, her porcelain grin impossibly wide, her painted eyes seeming to follow me, was a constant ache behind my own. But the scratching, that was new, and the giggling. A child's giggling, yet laced with an ancient malice that curdled my blood. My grandmother. I remembered her hands, gnarled like ancient roots, her eyes, the color of faded denim, holding a sorrow that ran deeper than any ocean. And now this house, her house, was a mausoleum for her secrets, and Leela was its reigning ghoul. A floorboard creaked downstairs. It was a distinct sound, not the usual settling of the house. It was deliberate, measured. My breath hitched. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the rhythm of the footsteps. They were slow, heavy, moving with an unnerving patience. They weren't the hurried steps of a trespasser. They were the steps of someone who belonged here, someone who knew the layout of these decaying halls intimately. The air was thick with the scent of stale cooking oil and something else, something metallic like old pennies. It was the smell of neglect, of things left to rot. But tonight it was laced with a new, acrid note, a sharp tang that pricked at my nostrils. Fear, I realized with a sickening lurch, had a smell. My mind, a battlefield of fragmented memories, replayed the last time I saw my grandmother alive. He had been in her study, a room I'd always avoided. It was crammed with artifacts, with relics of a life lived in isolation. Books with cracked leather bindings, curios of dubious origin, and the pervasive, cloying scent of dried flowers and beeswax. He had been holding Leela then, her face a mask of grim resolve. She'd said something, a jumble of words I hadn't understood, about a pact, a debt, a warding. I had been too young, too terrified to comprehend. Now, as the slow, deliberate footsteps ascended the grand staircase, each creak a hammer blow against my nerves, the fragmented pieces began to coalesce. It was Leela, and my grandmother. She hadn't been a victim, he had been a keeper, a guardian. The footsteps paused on the landing outside the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own pulse in my ears. I could feel eyes on me, unseen, unfelt, yet undeniably present. Then a single, soft rap on the heavy oak door. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. I pushed myself up, my limbs stiff and heavy, every muscle screaming in protest. What awaited me on the other side? Had my grandmother in her final moments left me a message, a warning, or perhaps a legacy? The rap came again, firmer this time, a summons I could no longer ignore. As I turned the knob, a rush of frigid air swept into the room, carrying with it the faint, sickly sweet scent of decay and something else. Lavender. It was my grandmother's perfume. The air in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, was thick with the stale scent of dried food and something else. Something metallic and sour. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant reminder of where I was, of what I was trying to escape. The whispers. They had followed me from the attic, through the echoing hallways, and now here, each rustle of my cheap fatigues, each creak of the floorboards beneath my worn boots seemed to amplify the disembodied murmurs. I'd bolted the heavy oak door behind me, the slam echoing a hollow thud that seemed to swallow the silence that followed. My breath hitched. The metallic tang was stronger now, mingling with the faint, cloying sweetness of decay. I scanned the vast, empty space. Long, scarred tables stretched into the gloom, their surfaces littered with the remnants of hurried meals. A soft, sibilant hiss like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten grave. It wasn't the wind. The windows, thick with grime and age, were sealed shut. This was inside. This was in here with me. My hands trembled as I reached for the heavy iron bolt on the door just to be sure. It was still firmly in place. I was trapped. No, I wasn't trapped. The door was. I was merely contained. A subtle but crucial distinction I clung to like a drowning man to driftwood. I remembered the doll, Leela, the porcelain grin that never wavered, the glass eyes that seemed to follow me even when her back was turned. He was the source, I knew it. Her malevolence had seeped into this house, into this place, twisting it into a labyrinth of my own worst fears. My head snapped up. I strained my ears, my heart racing a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. Nothing. I pushed myself off the wall, my muscles stiff and protesting. The thought was a desperate, primal urge. The front door, the groundskeeper's cottage, anywhere but here. I started to move, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the concrete floor. It settled on my skin, raising gooseflesh. The metallic scent intensified, sharp and coppery, like the taste of blood on a broken lip. I stopped, paralyzed. When the light returned, a figure stood at the far end of one of the tables. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the spot. They began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, scraping and shuffling, rearranging themselves. They formed a crude, jagged circle, then a wall, blocking the path to the door I had entered. The sound was like a swarm of insects, a dry, rasping cacophony that scraped against my nerves. Panic surged. I turned, looking for another exit, my eyes frantically scanning the walls. There had to be another way out. The metallic smell was overpowering now, making me gag. The figure at the table remained, a silent, unmoving sentinel in the shifting chaos. I could feel its presence, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I took a step back, my heel catching on something. I stumbled, falling to my knees. Porcelain. I looked down. It was a doll's hand, small and perfectly formed, its painted fingernails chipped and faded. It lay just inches from my own. Leela. And then I heard a soft, childlike giggle, impossibly close, right beside my ear. How had it gotten there? The air in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, was thick with the smell of stale grease and something else. Something acrid like burnt sugar. It clung to my tongue, a constant, unpleasant reminder of where I was. The chairs. They had formed a barrier, a jagged, impossible ring of wood and worn upholstery. The scraping sound had stopped, replaced by a silence that pressed in heavy and expectant. My own breathing sounded too loud, a ragged counterpoint to the stillness. I pushed against the nearest chair. It didn't budge, not an inch. It felt rooted as if it had grown from the stained linoleum. My knuckles were white where I gripped the splintered wood. This was Leela. It had to be. No amount of residual energy from the house could do this. This was deliberate, calculated. My gaze swept the room, searching for any sign, any flicker of movement. The moonlight, weak and diluted by the grimy windows, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every shift of my weight. The long tables were bare, their surfaces slick with an unseen residue. I remembered the hurried meals, the clatter of trays, the raucous shouts of the others. Now only the ghosts of those sounds lingered. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to slow my breathing, to mimic the controlled inhales and exhales I'd practiced in the quiet of my studio, but the air was too thin, too suffocating. I thought of the doll, of its chipped porcelain smile, its button eyes that seemed to follow me. It had been in the attic, nestled amongst moth-eaten blankets, just as I'd remembered. But its presence here in this desolate place was a new kind of horror. It was an intrusion, a violation. I ran my hand along the back of a chair, feeling the rough grain of the wood, the occasional snag of thread. Each touch sent a shiver up my arm. They were still warm. A subtle, unsettling heat radiated from them, a testament to their recent, unnatural movement. It was as if they had been actively engaged in forming this prison just moments before I had turned to flee. Leela wasn't just a doll, he was a conduit. A focal point for something ancient and hungry that had latched onto my childhood memories, feeding on my fear. And now, it had followed me here. I needed to break this circle. I needed to face it. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me, but beneath it, a flicker of resolve ignited. I wouldn't be trapped, not again. I focused on the one chair that seemed slightly less firmly planted, its legs angled precariously. It was a gamble, a desperate hope. Taking a deep breath, I lowered my shoulder and rammed into it. The wood groaned, a protest that echoed through the cavernous room. It moved, a fraction of an inch, then a full inch. The other chairs shifted subtly, as if responding to the disturbance, a ripple effect of unease. My muscles screamed with the effort, sweat beading on my forehead and stinging my eyes. A gap appeared, narrow but significant. Enough. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed through the opening, my clothes catching on the rough wood, tearing slightly. I stumbled forward, my eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of this malevolence. And then I saw it. At the far end of the mess hall, on one of the long tables, sat Leela. He was positioned directly under the single flickering fluorescent light, her chipped porcelain face illuminated in a sickly yellow glow. Her button eyes seemed to gleam, reflecting the weak light with an unnerving intensity. He was smaller than I remembered, but infinitely more terrifying. Waiting for what? For me to approach? For me to break? My feet felt heavy, rooted to the spot. The air around her shimmered, a subtle distortion, as if reality itself was fraying at her edges. Only the doll, sitting serenely, her painted smile a cruel mockery. I took a step forward, then another. Each movement was a Herculean effort, as if I were wading through thick, invisible syrup. "You're weak," they hissed. "You're broken." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, to find the quiet center I'd built within myself. The acrid smell intensified, burning my nostrils. This wasn't just a physical space. It was a mental one, a manifestation of my deepest fears. When I opened my eyes, Leela was closer. Or had she always been that close? The distance between us seemed to warp and shift, a disorienting illusion. Her head tilted slightly, a movement too fluid, too deliberate for inanimate porcelain. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her fabric body. I had to do something. Anything. My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the smooth, cool surface of the object I had brought with me. It was a foolish hope, a last resort, but it was all I had. The doll's smile seemed to widen, a silent, sinister invitation. What would happen if I reached out? What would happen if I didn't? The metallic tang of stale food still clung to the air in the mess hall after lights out, a ghost of the day's forced camaraderie. The chairs, stacked haphazardly against the scarred tables, still held a faint, unnerving warmth, as if the bodies that had occupied them moments before had left an imprint, a residual heat that prickled my skin even from a distance. I pulled my threadbare blanket tighter, the rough wool a poor imitation of comfort. The darkness wasn't complete. Slivers of moonlight, thick with dust motes, slanted through the grimy windows, painting distorted shadows across the linoleum floor. My breath hitched. The smell, that cloying, sweet decay, was back. It wasn't the sharp, acrid scent of the factory floor anymore, but something richer, more insidious, like overripe fruit left to rot in a closed room. It coiled in my throat, making me gag. I knew with a certainty that bypassed reason that Leela was here. Not just in my memory, not just a phantom limb of my fractured mind, but here. I strained my ears. The usual night sounds of the abandoned facility were amplified in the silence. The groan of metal, the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, the skittering of something small and fast in the walls. But beneath it all, a new sound began to emerge. A soft, rhythmic scratching like tiny fingernails on wood. My heart, a frantic drummer against my ribs, beat a desperate rhythm. I forced myself to focus, to recall the desperate struggle, the raw, visceral fight that had led me to this moment. Else, I remembered the desperate strength that had surged through me, a primal instinct to protect what little remained of myself. The burning sensation in my hands, not from heat, but from an unholy energy that had coursed through me, a mirror of the doll's own corrupting power. I had pushed, shoved, hurled her away, not with my physical strength alone, but with every ounce of will I possessed. I had seen her fall, heard the sickening crack of porcelain against concrete, and then, nothing. Now the scratching intensified, a frantic, desperate sound. It was no longer just wood, it was glass. The faint moonlight caught a glint, a shard of something reflecting the pale light. Leela, he was trying to get out, not out of the mess hall, but out of herself. The smell grew overpowering, a sickening perfume of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp, like blood. I could feel it on my skin, a clammy film. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a lingering echo of the power I had wielded. I stood, my legs stiff and aching. The rough blanket pooled around my feet. The chairs seemed to watch me, their warm surfaces radiating a silent accusation. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to run back to the relative safety of my small room, to bury my head under the covers and pretend this was another nightmare. But I couldn't. Not this time. I took a step, then another, my boots echoing in the vast, empty space. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It was accompanied now by a low, guttural hum, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. I could see her more clearly now, a shattered form huddled in the corner. Her painted smile, once a grotesque caricature of innocence, was now a jagged, broken line. The other stared, unblinking, directly at me. The hum intensified, a dissonant chord that scraped against my sanity. I felt a pressure behind my own eyes, a familiar sensation, the insidious tendrils of Leela's influence trying to reassert themselves. We are one. No, I wouldn't let her win, not again. This time I would keep it. I walked towards the corner, each step a deliberate act of defiance. He was reaching for me, her porcelain fingers, chipped and broken, extending from the shattered remnants of her dress. The hum reached a fever pitch, a jarring, discordant shriek that seemed to tear at reality. I could feel the energy building in her, a desperate final surge. And then with a guttural cry that was half rage, half despair, I lunged. I didn't grab her. I didn't try to destroy her further. Instead, I reached out with that same raw, burning power that had flowed through me before, but this time I directed it inward, towards myself. I focused on the connection, the parasitic link that bound us, and with a force born of years of torment, I severed it. The hum vanished. The scratching stopped. I stood panting, my body trembling, my hands slick with sweat. In the corner, Leela lay still, a broken, inanimate thing. The malevolence that had radiated from her was gone, leaving behind only the sad, pathetic remnants of a child's toy. Her single glass eye stared blankly at the ceiling, devoid of its sinister spark. I had done it. I had finally broken free. The weight that had pressed down on me for years, the suffocating blanket of her influence, was gone. I felt empty. The victory tasted like ash. I turned away from the shattered doll, from the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm with the phantom presence of my torment. It was no longer a space to be feared, but a vast, echoing emptiness. Had I truly destroyed her, or merely pushed her deeper, waiting for another moment of weakness?